My grandfather was a medical missionary in India, and he and his brother started the first modern hospital in Peshawar on the northwest frontier in 1900. And another great uncle of mine was the foremost specialist on TB in India. And through his work on the communication of that disease, I'm sure he helped to save tens of thousands of Indians in the 20s. And my father was also an Anglican priest and was a teacher, first in Egypt, where I was born, and much later in his career in Pakistan. So really, I have got no excuse. But my excuse is actually simply this. I studied economics, and I think economics has a lot to, or the discipline has a lot to be responsible for. I studied economics at Cambridge and at Yale, and the economics discipline completely neglected the religion and religious ideas. And the reason for this is simply that modern economics had and still has a basic premise that we are all materialists and utilitarians. That's where it all comes from. And although in economic history we learned about the Protestant ethic and through Weber and Tawney and others, when it actually came to economic modeling and the study of contemporary economics, there was no mention of religion at all. In 3 years at Cambridge in England and 1 year at Yale, I don't think I ever remember religion being mentioned once. Economics and religion were completely parallel universes. I had a teacher at Cambridge called Joan Robinson, who was one of Maynard Keynes's foremost disciples, and she once she wrote a book called Economic Philosophy, in which she said economics is a branch of theology. By that she meant that economics relies on a number of foundational values or myths or beliefs. What she didn't understand was that there is theology or religious values in economics implicitly. And so there we are. I mean, that was the intellectual legacy that I grew up in. And it percolated into policymakers in the World Bank, where I worked in the 60s and 70s, where religion was never mentioned or religious organizations never mentioned, and to DFID, where I was the head of DFID in the early 90s. For sure, at DFID, we supported NGOs, which were faith-inspired, such as CAFOD and Christian Aid, in their work. But it never occurred to us that they were in any way distinctive from Oxfam or Save the Children or any of the other organizations that we supported. I think the problem was actually rather more specific to development. We felt that the FBOs had no place in economic planning. Remember, in the 60s and 70s, development specialists were completely wedded to economic plans. Our model was probably the Indian planning system of the 1950s, where you had a completely secular government headed by Jawaharlal Nehru, who wanted nothing to do with religion at all. And certainly the idea that you would have religion or religious actors as part of that plan was an absolute no-no. And I think that had a profound influence on the way we all looked at this. And then we come to the late 80s and early 90s, where there is a beginning realization that the private sector is enormously important. You can't have successful development without a private sector. And then you move on and you have a realization that civil society is important. But then we don't actually think of religious organizations as particularly part of that civil society. It's all to do with the media and political organizations. And maybe a footnote, yes, there are religious organizations that are part of civil society. Anyway, it's a very come-lately set of institutions that people start looking at seriously. So that's the sort of journey I come through. And it's, over the last 10 years, I belatedly, with a few others, and certainly Catherine came to this much earlier than I did, who realized that you really can't understand development, its successes and failures, without plugging in and looking at the contributions of FBOs in their development work, but also looking at the values and motivations that come out of individuals in countries from their religions. And of course, this is exactly what the Berkley Center is all about, looking first of all at the contribution that FBOs can make and are making, and secondly, and probably with greater difficulty, because I think this is so complicated, looking at how religious values as behavioral values affect the way economies work.